all you brave souls who have ventured out here on this chilly morning. Thank you all for being here. Welcome to the Spring 2024 Bucket Course. My name is Sarah Smith. I work in the Office of Community Partnerships, Planning, and Research at Grinnell College. I have the honor of working with the Bucket Course Committee to bring you these bucket courses each week. The committee submits ideas and thoughts, and this was one of the very first ones they submitted, Ryan, and wanted to have you here. So we're excited to have you here today. But before we begin, just a few quick reminders. Please make sure you silence your cell phones. If you have a tea coil, please turn it on now. At the end, if time allows, we'll take questions and we'll come around with microphones so everyone can hear what the questions are. And then if you have time following the program, if you could help us put chairs away, that would be lovely so we can all get on with our day. So today I have the honor of introducing and welcoming Ryan Solomon. Ryan is the Director of Civic Education and Innovation at Grinnell College and facilitates community engagement opportunities for students. So will you please help me welcome Ryan Solomon?
Okay. Hey, Kirst. So you guys can sit down. Yeah, you can sit down. As I'll introduce in a moment, a couple of the facilitators for the Listening Project are here with us today, and so we'll introduce them in a moment. It is an absolute pleasure to be with you today. Can everyone hear? Okay, perfect. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. And I'll reinforce, I'm in a really privileged position in the work. In the work that I do for the college, because like Sarah, we get to do work supporting the best of the community. And I, as I was saying to Bob earlier, I've quickly learned that there's more to Grinnell than meets the eye. And I always get to see the kindness, the compassion, the concern of community members across a range of constituents in the community. For instance, I help run our main sit-down community meal, and it's been a real privilege to see community members from different backgrounds interacting with one another, serving one another, and learning from one another. So I'm going to move fairly quickly. Bob, there we go. Is this going to move? Okay, this went dead for a sec. So I might just stand up here. So what we're going to do today is that I'm going to give you a bit of context on the Listening Project, so you know what kind of work we're doing. And then we're also going to use this as an opportunity to provide some framing of ways that we might approach listening, why listening is important at the moment, and particularly how we might use listening and dialogue as a way to transform conflict. And conflict, as we'll explore, can look like a lot of different things, from disagreement to really struggling to live with someone else that you have some issues with. So at its heart, what is the Listening Project is that I'll quickly share, really quickly, my background. I grew up in Johannesburg, South Africa. My formative schooling was under apartheid in South Africa. I graduated from high school in the year that apartheid formally came to an end. And so I got to experience South Africa's transition to democracy. And so that has shaped a lot of the way that, my motivation to go and get involved in higher education and the community work that I do is that experience of seeing the injustice of apartheid and seeing the possibilities of democracy. And so the crucial question that I'm always grappling with is, how do we strengthen democracy? How do we create ways for people to participate, to make their voice heard, so that we can create more just communities that make space for everyone in the community? And I have learned over time that dialogue is a central part of that work, that when we can create a space where people, we are different. Democracy asks a lot of us because we have different beliefs and values and experiences, and we don't always agree on what needs to happen in terms of what our community should look like or what kinds of decisions we should make in our community. But it's really important that we find space to engage with one another, because if we're going to make the most of democracy, we need to believe that everyone in the community has a right to participate and be heard. And so that's kind of the lofty ambition of something like the Listening Project. The reality is we just bring different community members together so that we can listen to and learn from one another. And at the heart of the project is trying to create an opportunity for students in particular to meet with and engage with community members. But that's not exclusive to what we're doing. It's an important part of what we do, but for us it's really trying to create a space where a diverse group of community members can engage with one another. Ultimately, what makes the Listening Project a vibrant project is I have a wonderful group of facilitators who help support the work that we do. And that's at the core of what, like the basic premise of the Listening Project is listening is hard. We live in a culture where we're trained to talk first, to argue first, to want to disprove rather than try to understand what someone is saying. And so all that we do is we provide some scaffolding, some structure to encourage our best listening. And the facilitators serve in that capacity. And I'm really lucky, so I have at the moment, about 10 student facilitators who participate in the project, and then I have 5 community facilitators. So I'm going to quickly, because I can see I've got my 2 students at the back there, Coast and Grant, you want to raise your hands and everyone can see. So I'll make sure that there's some opportunity for you to meet them. And then I've got some of my community facilitators here. So Jan, Vanessa, Misty, and Deb, if you want to raise your hands. Woo! But again, so there's a lot of intentionality with the Listening Project, that this isn't a college-focused project. This is an effort to say, it doesn't matter who you are, we want to create a space where you can engage with one another, and I think that that's where a lot of the vitality and success of the project is. So what I will do quickly, Sarah, are you happy to help me with the mic? Yeah. So why don't we have Coast, you can start off just quickly saying why you got involved in the Listening Project and something that's been valuable for you being involved in the Listening Project.
Hey, can you hear me? My name is Kost, and I came originally from Ukraine. Moved to Iowa about 3.5 years ago. I got involved with the Listening Dialogue Project because I knew, well, first of all, it started that I had an argument with my friend, different views on political opinions, and when I saw that Ryan posted on Handshake that's what, like, we're learning how to understand other people instead of proving them wrong, and then understand their core value. And I thought this would be something really interesting to learn about. And so, yeah, it has been a really valuable experience. I definitely become better at communicating with other people, understanding where they're coming from. And even though we're coming from different backgrounds, I am more willing to listen to them. And because I'm usually a more talkative person and I take the podium, but sometimes I try to step back and listen, ask more curious questions. So yeah, and I definitely have been seeing a lot of improvements.
Yeah. And Misty, are you happy to also share? You want to pass the mic to Misty? Oh, we got another mic on that side. They are so efficient. Okay.
I was introduced to the Listening Project by being a participant in one of the dialogues, and so I went through the 2 dinner nights that we had there, and I was just so impressed with the experience. It was great being able to talk with the people. I don't remember the topic at this point, but I was just so impressed with the experience that when Ryan mentioned, you can go ahead and be a volunteer and ask if you want, I have to do this. And then part of what I feel is that, for me, I work at First Presbyterian Church, and it's a deeply held belief for me that listening and communicating with people is just how you show how valuable people are. And so this is just part of enhancing our society. And so I feel like the listening project is a way to just give us the skills that we need and also more practice doing it. And so I just think that the project is, from its core, good.
Thanks, Misty. So I'm going to quickly, just so you have some context, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jan, because she's going to provide you some context of what our dialogue sessions look like. Just so you get a sense, is that, you know, at its basic, we're just bringing different people together and saying, what can we learn from one another? But that it doesn't mean we haven't been shy to take on difficult questions. And so, for instance, in the fall, we did a range of dialogues around political issues in the lead up to the election. And so we explored different political perspectives. We particularly looked at, right prior to the election, the role of faith and religion in American politics, and we had some really good discussion about that. And so one of the things that we're always interested in is understanding where moments of misunderstanding or conflict might be in the community, and say, let's bring people together, because we've learned that conflict is often isn't reflective of what people think and feel about one another. And so that bridge building, depolarizing work to say we're not defined by an us versus them, we're not defined by Democrats or Republicans, that we're more complicated and interesting, and it's worthwhile to engage with one another. Jan, so are you happy to you share some? Jan provided this fantastic handout. Sarah, would you mind? And we might not be able to go through everything in the handout, but if you just want to give a summary of what you think makes a facilitated dialogue a meaningful experience.
Well, this came out of last night's brainstorming with myself, but it also is an outgrowth of the participation that I've had, and with the people I met. Last Sunday, we had a kind of wrap-up session about how to talk about identity, and each group had discussed in a kind of dialogue fashion. We each discussed certain ways that dialogue could facilitate our understanding of different identities. And in the process, I started listening to the students and community members in the group, and I heard all kinds of really exciting and wonderful reasons why this project is so important. So I put together this list of reasons why and how I think that dialogue has been very meaningful to me. First, as an educator, it's always been high on my list of how to approach whether it's a literary text or a theater piece or an intercultural exchange. Everything is about dialogue, everything is about listening, everything is about trying to understand where the other side lives, how they live, and how they think. So for me, this project just fell right into my lap and my interest area. And also I met Ryan for the first time when he attended a program that I had sponsored here in this very room in 2022 with a friend of mine, and we talked about interracial friendship, and it was called More Than Skin Deep. And perhaps some of you participated in that. Yeah, I'm seeing hello, yes. Well, Heather and I are coming back in April with funding from the Racial Equity Grant to redo our program, which is 50% performance presentation of our story and 50% engagement with using the facilitators from the listening project for the second half of the program. So it'll be partly performance and half conversation and guided discussion. And I guess I put my emphasis on the idea of being guided in discussion. So a lot of what I emphasize in this summary or this list is the fact that we don't have opportunities to get together, and this is a way to create a space for the kind of conversations that none of us would normally have if we were just wandering around talking to people we know. And so I thought that was a really important part of the listening project. And the second part is the facilitation, because facilitators are just people like us, where we started out as participants, we trained as thinking about how does it feel to be a participant, and what do we need to do to facilitate, to make this conversation meaningful. How do we keep it on track? How do we pay attention to what agreements our people have accepted at the beginning. So it's very structured. So it feels scary at first to go to a space where maybe you don't know anyone, or maybe you know one or two people, but then they're going to break you up, and you're going to be put in a situation where you don't know people. But that's the whole part, and the exciting part, I think, of getting to talk to each other about something meaningful, but also something that is guided and facilitated. So you're not likely to be going off on tangents, or hopefully we have this saying, if you're quiet, lean in. And if you're talkative, as Coast very honestly admitted, if you're talkative, lean out. So be attentive to the fact that you are part of the process, and the process means that you're paying attention to those two sides. So I'll say I've said enough, and
That's great.
onward.
Sorry, I'll let you finish. Okay. So, and again, so this is the privilege that I have, is that the Listening Project is this wonderful collaborative experience, and it wouldn't be successful without the great facilitators that I get to rely on. And we will, at the end, we'll talk about some ways that if you're interested in getting involved in the Listening Project, ways that you might do that. But first, let's just talk about, particularly at this moment, why listening matters. And I know, so I'm trying to play with some expectations of Bucket Course, is that I want to make it interactive for you. So if you have your phone with you, then I'm going to encourage you to pull it out. And there are two ways. So this presentation is called a Mentimeter, is you can actually interact with it rather than just, so I can ask you questions, you can respond. And so you have two ways. You can either open up your browser and go to menti.com, and then you just put in this code and it will take you to the presentation. Or if you know how to use a QR code, which means you just take your camera and you point it at the QR code, it will then show a link that you can click to, and it will automatically take you into the presentation. Okay. So I'll give you a moment. If you have any challenges, particularly Coast and Grant, being young, they're actually both computer science majors. So if you're having any issues getting on to Menti at the moment, raise your hand, and either Grant or Coast will go over and give you and help you there. So let's test, see if we can make Menti work. So my first question of the day, interactive question of the day, is what kind of listener are you? So you just choose which of these you think reflects. So are you a distracted listener? Are you a dependent listener? Are you an impatient listener who's waiting? You know, this has been a personal, and I'll say, dialogue in lots of ways is therapy for me. I'm trying to fix my bad listening habits. Do you talk a lot, or are you feel that you're a really strong listener? Sure, the Menti. I think if I go back, it'll stop people being able to fill in. Yeah, top of the screen. Join menti.com, use that code. It'll appear at the top of every screen. Okay. So I'll give us a moment. Well, I'm excited to see that we've got some confident listeners in the room as well. Sure. In the zone is I'm trying to play off that idea of a meditative, that you quickly can be present and give your full attention without any distraction when you're listening to someone. I don't like that's I have participated in some meditation activities over the course of my life, and I have found that I'm really bad at it because I struggle with that high level of focus, and I find my mind wandering all the time. So I'm not trying to be prescriptive. Actually, I think part of the problem is a lot of the advice of listening has very strong, it's almost asking you to be a perfect listener, and I've never been able to be a perfect listener. And I think we become better listeners when we're honest about what the challenges of listening. Okay. So we've gotten 12 responses. I'll wait 1 more minute. I'll say one other thing that you can do if you have fun, and the students can help with this as well, is you'll see at the bottom of the screen there's the possibility of doing a thumbs up. So if you like what someone said, you can give them a thumbs up, and it'll show a thumbs up on the screen. So thanks. Was that Coastal Grant who did the thumbs up for us? Thanks, Grant. Okay. So ultimately, I think if you're like me, there's lots of room for us to grow as listeners. It's something that it doesn't matter where you are in your life. We can still work on becoming a better listener. We want to leverage our strengths as a listener, but put us in the right circumstance and we'll struggle to listen. So this time what you can do is on this slide, you can actually type an answer. Okay, so this is an open-ended question. Why do you think listening is important? And what's nice about the Mentimeter is that we can get lots of different perspectives really quickly without everyone, making time for everyone to talk. So anything that you want to share on why you think listening is important. Well, I love that one. And with an exclamation mark. Others have good ideas too. Can have good ideas. I love that qualification as well. Sometimes I don't feel like I love you, but I don't think you have a good idea at the moment. Okay. So I think what we're seeing, and I'm being deliberate here, that I'm not defining listening because I think we as a group are doing good work defining for ourselves what listening looks like. And we can see, so there's this relational component that it becomes a way of connecting with and building relationships with other people and showing that we're invested in them and that we value them. And I think that that's incredibly important, that there's something immensely powerful in feeling that you have been heard. And then we've also, in many of these comments speak to the value of listening as a learning activity, as a way that we move out of our own perspective and we grow our understanding of the world by sharing in the unique perspective of someone else. So that there are all ways in which issues are generally more complicated than a singular view. So that there's immense value. And we're going to talk a lot today about the power of curiosity. And I think that speaks to is that because we care or we invested in people and we want to learn from them, it becomes easier to be curious about them. But then we also need to acknowledge sometimes why it's hard to be curious about people. I also want to, I'm going to come to in a moment, this listening is the main way to access someone else's mind. And I want to focus on that because I think it gets to, we often hear this distinction between hearing and listening. And a lesson that I've learned, and I'm going to even raise a problem whether or not we can completely know someone else's mind. But I will speak to some ways in which our own mind stops us from listening to others, even if it's unconsciously. So last, and then let's give some context here. What are some of the obstacles to being a good listener? And this can be from your personal experience or just observation generally about the challenges of listening. Okay, and we will definitely focus on that one. Yep. Well, I love that honest, my mind wanders. You know, and I also, because I'm not sure if it was a typo or intentionally meant, that there's a double meaning of wander as in losing track, and wonder, you know, as in curious. I'm curious about. Yeah. Thanks, Coast, for helping there. Sorry, you know, and this is, you know, the irony is that like technology can facilitate all kinds of cool things for us, but I think one of the biggest obstacles to listening is technology, and so you know there's lots to unpack here. I'll quickly just talk because I think you know I'll have a confession quickly. One of my vices at the moment is YouTube. I watch a little too much YouTube, but one of the reasons that I like watching YouTube is because I can scrub what I'm watching, which means I can speed along. I can just click it to make it go faster. And I've noticed that often when I'm watching a video, let's say it's 10 minutes long, I'll watch it in less than 2 minutes because I will just find the things that I actually want to pay attention to. And I've noticed that that's become true of a lot of the listening that I do as well, where I'm like, speed up, get to the point. And I'm getting really, really impatient. I'm not really paying attention, or I'm distracted. You know, ironically, all my technology, my notifications go off on my watch, and then I'm like, oh, sorry, I'm not actually paying attention to you. And so that matters. I want to reinforce again that a crucial part of being a good listener is paying attention. And so ultimately, I want to share 2 strategies that we use in our facilitation work to help us be better listeners. And these 2 strategies, when we get to them, are about learning to pay attention, not being distracted, being focused, being patient. But the bigger challenge that I've learned when it comes to listening, and a number of you have spoken to it, is I may be paying attention, but I'm not really paying attention because either I'm trying to prove that I'm right, or something that someone is saying is so disagreeable that I can't find a reason to want to listen to them. And so struggling with, you know, like, paying attention is the great first step. But if we only pay attention, I don't think that we will get the full experience of listening. So, point number 1, being a good listener requires us to give our fullest attention to others. And then to John's comment earlier, I deliberately used the language fullest because I can't give, like, I don't know if I'm actually capable of giving my full attention to someone. Just mentally, you know, call it bad habits. Even you know, how do I listen to others as if they were my most revered teacher speaking to me the cherished last words? And I want to get to that point where that's the kind of attention that I give to someone. But you know, for me, the important thing that I've learned recently is that listening, when it really happens, is a perspective-taking exercise. What does that mean? It means that I consider someone else's view on something, that I can see, and I very carefully don't use the language of empathy because I've just found there are lots of times in my life that even in moments where I found understanding, I haven't always gotten to the point of full empathy. But that willingness to consider something not from my perspective, but from the perspective of someone else, is really, really important in listening. And I think that that's a different measure of listening, saying, I paid attention to you, or asking the question at the end, did I fully engage with your perspective? Did I learn something from you? Did I see things in a new way? And I'll reinforce really, really quickly, because I'm not, I think you all understand the principle. If I can get this to play. So we have an image here. What is the image? Okay. But when you move in space, and I wish that the video was done from the starts with you not being able to see the final image, and then you can move to seeing the image. But the point is simply that there are lots of ways that this would just be a random collection of balls without any meaning, but you change where you stand, and you see that image in a different way. So again, like, why is listening important? Why? Because we don't have a total view on anything. We think we know, we might be saying, this is what the image is. Okay, it's just a random collection of balls, and someone else is saying, no, it's an eye. and you're adamant, and your goal is simply to be right, you may be missing out on an important perspective. So that simple piece of wisdom of because others are located in a different space than you, space, time, culture, social circumstances, they can see things that we potentially can't. Okay? But the more challenging thing, and again, I won't go into a lot of it, is a lot of important research has been done recently highlighting, and we use the language of bias or assumptions, is that cognitively our processes of interpretation are often mistaken. That we think we're seeing something as a fact or as a reality, but that's only a partial picture of something. Okay? So, and I experience this all the time. I think political dialogue is the most profound example of the struggle of listening, is when someone shares a political perspective and I'm just like, I can't understand you anymore, I can't relate to you anymore. All I see is this representation or stereotype of you. Okay? And it's habitual, it's unconscious, and you may be paying attention to someone and in the back of your mind you're going, this person is crazy. Why am I paying attention to them? And that's part of the thing, the important lesson of listening. Yes, that's going to happen. That's not a bad thing. We want to be able to grapple with that and say, understanding that, how do I move into a position of perspective taking? The other crucial lesson that I've learned recently is one of the ways that our brain works is to take what is unfamiliar and make it familiar, put it back into what's familiar to us. And so often our interpretation process works in a process of translation, of taking something that's different and making it understandable to us, and then we think we've taken someone else's perspective. We're like, oh, I get you. But we realize that we've translated that difference into our familiar framework, and we've actually missed the important lesson. And so, we have a particular practice that we've been working on as facilitators that helps that. And so let's talk about some ways. So the most crucial thing that we've learned, and so the metaphor that has been important for us as a team is, because there are lots of definitions of active listening, is active means active, not passive. And actually a lot of the images or kind of the valorization of listening is that, again, be in the zone, is you be this stoic passive listener who gives you full attention. And actually, the best listeners are those who actively engage with a person, especially because often people don't know what they're trying to say. Okay? We have that all the time, where you're asked to respond to a prompt, and you're trying to collect your thoughts, and you're trying to get is like, what's at the heart of what I'm trying to say? And the first thing you say may not be the best representation of what you're trying to say. Or there's complexity underlying it. There's lived experience that you're trying to get at, and finding the language to articulate that. And so a good listener isn't someone who just passively waits. It's someone who says, help me understand. Tell me more. Is there a story or an experience that you can share? Why, is that important to you? What shaped that? So there's immense power in asking questions. That for me is, I may not always be the most attentive listener, but the one thing that I've gotten good at is asking curious questions. Okay? And I find that in that process of asking questions, not only does it create a sense that this is a collaborative, listening is a collaborative activity, but it disciplines me. Because in order to ask a good question, I actually have to pay attention to what they're saying. And so there, how about anyone else? I'm trying to think here. Vanessa or Deb, because you haven't had an opportunity. Vanessa, because you are a master of asking good questions. Vanessa, how has asking questions been powerful for you in listening? And a mic will come to you right now.
I've not been asked a question like that before, so I find that it disarms people, and they're less likely to respond to me defensively, and so I think I get better answers when I do that, and it makes the conversation proceed forward
Sure.
in ways that it would be. I do notice a difference between when I ask a question versus when I make statements, and Usually it goes better when I ask the questions.
Yeah. A question just, it gives people agency. It says, I want to hear what you have to say on your terms. I'm not trying to predetermine, what your response is or make you responsive. And so that language of, it's incredibly invitational. And so that's the core of what we do in the listening project, is we create a space for people to listen and we ask good questions. And we encourage people to ask good questions. So in order to make that a practice for the group, we're going to do an activity where you get to ask some questions of each other. But I'm going to add one other thing to this so again, if you take anything away from our discussion today, asking curious questions is such a powerful tool in listening. The more questions we ask, the better. But something that I've learned, and this is a personal learning, is sometimes when I ask questions and someone responds, it becomes that moment of translation. It's like, oh, no, I've had a similar experience. And then all of a sudden I'm moving back into, thank you for sharing. Let me tell you about my similar experience. And then that moment of difference and perspective taking gets closed down because I'm trying to relate to them and share a little bit more of what's important to me. The boomerang question. Do you want to explain? Sure. Yeah. And so, because we're going to take a break in a moment, and then let's take a break and we'll do our activity after. We'll see how that works. But so, point number one, asking questions is a key part of being a good listener. Point number two is check for understanding. Okay, how do we do that? And I, my facilitators have heard this from me repeatedly. You briefly summarize what someone said, or paraphrase what someone said. And I was like, I've had bad experiences with that, and I just felt like I'm regurgitating what someone said, and it didn't feel natural, it didn't feel comfortable. And I think part of it is because when I was summarizing, I was trying to get everything right. And so again, it became like, so a brief summary. If I understand what you said is this, okay, is what I've realized in checking for understanding is often I didn't get entirely what they were saying. Like I'll ask a question, they'll respond, and I think I understand where they're coming from, and then they respond to me and say, yeah, you got it partially, but here's something else important that you missed. And then what does that do? It means I can lean back into the perspective taking, and I can ask better questions. Oh, okay, thanks. What other experience, tell me more, give me some more background on that so that I can understand where you're coming from, okay? So, because we're at 22, should we take a break? And then I'll explain the activity just so that you have. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pair you up, okay? And I would encourage you, but I'm not going to, because I know moving around in this context is challenging, but I would encourage you to interact with someone that because I know that sometimes when you're sitting with someone, you're sitting with a friend or someone that you're familiar with, is find someone else, and you're just going to pair up, and you're going to share the story of your name, where your name came from, and we'll model it when we come back from break. How you got your name, what your name means, what it means to you. Have you changed your name? Have you, there's lots of things that you could potentially talk about your name. And here's the crucial thing. So you're going to share your story, and then your partner is going to ask you 2 questions. Okay? And it's crucial, 2 questions. Because you ask a question, and then you're going to ask a follow-up question that builds off the response to the first question. Okay? So you're going to be paying attention to them, because you want to make sure that your question relates to what they responded to. And then after they've answered those 2 questions, you're going to check for understanding. You're going to briefly summarize and say, so this is what I heard. Okay, is that right? Did I miss anything? Okay, simple activity, but it can be a powerful activity. Okay, have a break, and then we'll come back and we'll do this. So we're going to pair up, because I want to make sure we have some time to talk about listening in conflict situations. Although you're going to find that the advice is the same. Ask curious questions and check for understanding. And then I'm going to move that out so it's not in. Okay, so name stories. So we're going to pair up in a moment. And again, I've got lots of great facilitators here, including Grant and Coast. And so if you want to meet a student or one of my facilitators and learn about their name stories, then I'd encourage you to connect with them. So again, the name story is any valuable information about your name. Where it came from, how it was chosen, what it means to you, I think is the more important thing. Does it have any significance for you? Are there any stories behind your name? And I'll give you, so quick, my name is Ryan. My mother named me after Ryan O'Neal, the actor. And the funny thing is, this is the only audience that will know how to respond to that, because like students, they have no context for Ryan O'Neal. Yeah, no, and he only became like I didn't have any. I don't know why my mom was interested in Ryan O'Neal, but he passed away recently, obviously, and so that became something for me to think about. But where my name became significant for me is at some point in my life I learned that Ryan is an Irish word, and it means little king. And there was something about my last name is Solomon, and I was little King Solomon, and I was wise, and the funny thing is when I reference Solomon these days, my students are also often blank. They're like, "Who's Solomon?" Guy tried to cut a baby in half, So that was just, it made me feel special in that way. I will say that when I was in high school, everyone had nicknames. And my friends cleverly came up with a nickname for me, which was R Soul. Yeah, you'll have to think about that one for a moment. And they were chanted. I used to do a lot of track and field, and they were chanted while I was running down the last 100 meters. It's a good thing to have friends when you're a teenager. But two crucial things happened. I'm Mormon, and I served a 2-year mission in South Africa, and I served in predominantly black areas of South Africa when most white South Africans hadn't been into that part of South Africa. And so I was given a Zulu name, which is a direct translation of my name, which is Nkosi, king, and Tani, which is the little king. And so that just reinforced in my mind the special name. And then it came to its final culmination with when my daughter was born, my first child. I chose to name her Sarah, and it's a Hebrew word which means princess. And so she's Princess Solomon. I'm little King Solomon. And I can't tell you how many times I dressed up as a princess with her, and we had princess parties. But she really is my best bud in the world, and so that affinity, there's just something special about that connection. I'm going to share one. So the point is, I think all of us have, I don't know, I've had lots of participants in this activity where people there's not a lot of story behind my name. But who you are is interesting, and I hope you'll find something to share that is meaningful about you. And if it's not your name, then something else that's important to you. I've also had participants who have had very negative experiences with their name, and I've had lots of people who've changed their name. And so sometimes I've also had students who've experienced prejudice because of their name. So for instance, a lot of Asian students who come to America are forced to anglicize their name. So they'll take on an American name rather than because it's too difficult to get people to pronounce a Chinese name or something like that. So I want to honor that there's complexity. This is not, for me, it's joy. But for other people, it may not be. But we want to listen to all of those experiences. And so I hope that you will feel comfortable to share, and you're not under any pressure. If it's hard to talk about something related to your name, this is not making you share. And I hope that the questions that are asked of you will help you think about things that are important and meaningful for you. Okay. If you're happy to pair up with someone, we'll do this in about 10 minutes. Okay. Anyone? Okay, so I hate to end a good conversation. And if you want to move back to your original space, you're happy to do. If you're enjoying where you're sitting now, feel free to stay where you are. Okay. And with more time, I would ask you to reflect on what that experience was like. Ultimately, and thank you for sharing with me. It was a privilege. When people start sharing their stories, you start to see how interesting and complex and wonderful they are. And again, in moments of disagreement and conflict, it can be hard to listen to people's stories. So we want to celebrate those moments when we do get to listen to people's stories. But I'm also hoping that you experience the value of asking questions. How it's hard for people to decide what they want to share. And there's always that navigation, especially when you're with strangers, about what am I willing to reveal about myself. And if we stay at that initial response, then we don't get into the stories. But our willingness to ask questions just opens up and invites so much learning and perspective taking. I'll also just reinforce again, I'm not sure if you got to do it, but checking for understanding. Just that quick moment to be like, especially if you have that moment where your mind wandered slightly in the conversation, it becomes the opportunity to check in and be, let's make sure that I heard what you said. So I'm going to move fairly quickly because we don't have a lot of time, and I do want to leave an opportunity for you to ask questions. So I think that's fairly self-evident. I'm not going to do this. How do you typically handle conflict? But I work in a context, especially with students, where there's a lot of conflict avoidance, and we've learned a lesson in the listening project that that you often can't have good dialogue until you get into conflict. Okay, and so all I want to do for the purpose of this final part of the session is to say, conflict is not a bad thing. Okay, I think we often see conflict as a failure, or the result of a mistake. Conflict is just a result of the fact that we're different people and we're going to see things in different ways. And sure, there are different levels of conflict. But ultimately, what I want to highlight is the existence of conflict isn't the concern. How we respond to the conflict is what matters. Conflict can be powerful for learning and creating understanding or accountability. And I'm not going to pretend that moments of conflict aren't difficult. Like just this week at the moment, I'm dwelling in conflict, and my stomach is just constantly in a knot. But I also know how if I'm willing to not be overcome by that anxiety, and I'm willing to think about how I might transform or translate that conflict into an opportunity for learning, that inevitably I'm realizing that I'm seeing the conflict from only one perspective. And that I think that I'm right, and particularly my emotional response, it feels like it's valid, and it is valid, but it's only part of the information about what's going on. And often I find that when I'm in moments of conflict, particularly when I'm getting anxious or I'm getting angry, that I'm overreacting to a conflict situation, that sometimes when I engage with the person that I'm in conflict with, is like I misinterpreted something or I misunderstood something, and I've been getting myself all emotionally worked out, but the other person didn't experience it in the same way. So ultimately, that's just the thing, is what I want to highlight for us. So go back to that comment. Honest disagreement is often a good sign of progress. So I'm going to show this video, and it should work because we were connected. And it's just highlighting using Aikido as a way to think of. Often when we experience conflict, we experience it as an attack on us. Being called into question, then we need to defend ourselves. And Judy Ringer, who's a conflict transformation consultant, offers us a different way of thinking about conflict. And so we'll see if I can get this to play properly. Yeah.
Conflict isn't positive or negative. Conflict just is. If we're alive, we're going to have it. But conflict doesn't have to be a negative thing. It can be an opportunity. It can be a teacher. I'm Judy Ringer, and I am the owner of Power and Presence Training and I help people regain power under pressure. I work with people who want to build teams and they understand that conflict is a part of that and they want to be proactive about it. I've been practicing Aikido for 20 years. It means the way of blending or harmonizing with energy. If you watch Aikido closely, you'll see that it's not really fighting. Aikido shows us a different kind of power in which we stay in control of ourselves. And as long as I can do that, then I can manage whatever comes my way. The centered state gives us options we don't feel that we have when we're under pressure. Conflict, difficulty, attack can be a source of energy that we can utilize and redirect. Life throws things at us every day that we can't predict and can't control. If we develop these skills, then conflict can be just an interesting conversation in which we learn a lot about ourselves and the other person. It can be fun.
And again, I think there's a big difference. There's the insight that conflict is just energy, and the question is, how do we potentially blend with that energy to transforming that into practice? Because there's still lots of moments where, in a moment of conflict, I'm just like, how do I turn this into a different kind of energy? But it's that insight that listening is the centered state. Listening is we're no longer being reactive or responsive. We're saying, this is happening, let me try and understand what is happening, and then respond from that space of understanding rather than being reactionary. But in order for conflict to be an opportunity, one of the things that Judy Ringer highlights is that we're going to have to change our attitude towards the conflict and the person or persons that we're in conflict with. If we respond in traditional ways, and what does a conflict situation generally encourage? It encourages an adversarial approach. Okay, I'm going to prove that I'm right. I'm going to highlight to that person that they're wrong. I'm going to call them out. I'm going to challenge them because they need to understand that they were the source of the conflict. And so it's, how do we break out of that adversarial framework? And ultimately, listening is the way that we do that. If I need to be right, my conflict partner will most likely also want to be right. This is what adversarial dynamic does, is it starts ratcheting up this kind of tit for tat, so that ultimately we both become increasingly defensive, and then the conflict escalates. And so what we're trying to do is de-escalate the conflict. The more I try to prove my point, the harder they push back. And in a context of disagreement, particularly because we work in a space of dealing with political disagreement, it's hard because sometimes listening can feel like concession. Like you're agreeing with what someone says if you attempt to listen to them. And that it's, like you still hold your position. This is not giving ground. This is saying, I want to understand where you're coming from. And I can still disagree with you, and I can still say, this is my perspective on something, but I'm not playing into that adversarial dynamic. I'm going to take the time to listen, and because there are things that I can't see completely. I have a partial perspective, and I'm willing to open and enlarge my perspective, even as I stay true to what I believe. Instead of avoiding or resisting the energy coming my way, I need to learn to dance with it, harness it, and guide it. The question is, how do we do that? What would normally be understood as an act of aggression is instead seen as energy to be utilized, entered into, blended with, and redirected, changing the dynamic from resistance to connection. And so here's my answer. Something that we're always going to be working on, trying to get right. Listening and asking curious questions is a key way to transform conflict into an opportunity for perspective taking. And she offers these insights about asking questions. So again, I'm just layering on that insight that there's great power in asking questions. At the core of listening as a perspective-taking exercise. So listening as more than simply paying attention, but a collaborative activity where I work with you to try and understand where you're coming from. Even in moments of disagreement and conflict. Okay? So listening doesn't just happen when we're on the same page or we have an existing relationship. That listening is most powerful in those moments when we're engaging with strangers or we're collaborating with someone that we disagree with. Asking questions is blending and adding my energy to theirs. It puts me in the powerful position of learning where my partner is coming from. I hear their intentions, hopes, and values. And then I'm responding to something different. I'm not responding to an adversary. I'm responding to another human being who is worthy of respect in the same way that I'm worthy of respect. And our, the strength and balance from which we're able to engage with that person is totally different than when we're in a reactionary position. Inquiry also diffuses any conflict energy my partner is holding, such as anger and fear, allowing this emotional intensity to find a release valve. So instead of ratcheting up emotions, it says, help me understand what you're feeling, so that I can be responsive to that. And then there's an opportunity for you to hear where I'm coming from, what I'm feeling. And then we can honor those emotions, but recognize that they're only part of the total picture of what we're engaging with. Okay. So our last, we've got to, I'm going to put this to a vote, because I know that the tradition here is for you to be able to ask questions, and I want to honor that. And if I give you another dialogue activity, and I'm going to ask you to raise your hands. Would you like us to preserve those last 10 minutes for questions from you, or would you like to do one last dialogue activity? What's the vote? Preserve 10 minutes, the last 10 minutes for Q&A. Raise your hand now. Okay, that's complicated. So enough of you raised your hand, that's what we're going to do. So I'll finish here quickly. How to get involved with the listening project. We have a big dialogue coming up in April, exploring the rural-urban divide in Iowa, and you'll see advertising for that coming out closer to April, and you are welcome to join us. Jan, she mentioned her project, More Than Skin Deep, which will be happening on April 24th and 26th, and so that's another opportunity to engage in dialogue with community members, and you're also welcome if you feel free to become a facilitator and join our team. Okay, that's me. Ask questions.
All right, I have a microphone. So does Barb, if you have questions. Okay, then I'm going to get started. I have a question.
Sure.
I feel like I definitely in conflict situations every single day that I'm trying to resolve or keep calm or try to move forward in a positive way. Yeah. I find that listening and trying to resolve drains a ton of my energy every day. I'm exhausted. I see the quote and trying to process of asking questions will help kind of diffuse some of that energy, which I think is inquiry questions in particular, which I think is really great. So I need to remember that. Are there other helpful things to help with the feeling I have of draining energy from me? And maybe that's just mental too. Just sure. Do you have any, what are some thoughts, experiences you had that help with just the drain that I feel every day because of it?
I'm going to turn that, I'm going to ask if any, so this is the difficulty. So why I love the work of the Listening Project is we can deal with inconsequential conflict. Why? Because people who come to Listening Project dialogues are generally strangers. And at the end of our dialogues, we can have a healthy moment of saying, like, we disagree politically, but we all walk away from one another. You know, at the end of the day, we may interact with each other in the community again, but we have no other obligation to each other than the person, you know, being there at that particular moment. You know, conflict, for instance, with people that you work with means, you know, that I'm connected to those people. I have to interact with them, and there may be these moments where what happens is that I listen, and I feel like I understand the person, but I think ultimately for conflict to really be de-escalated, there needs to be change, not just listening. And so otherwise what happens is you listen and you feel like, okay, I'm trying to understand you, and then the same issue comes up again. And you're just like, well, I thought we had a conversation about this. Like, why are we, And so, I didn't speak to that, and for, my answer to that at the moment is restorative practices. It's a method that says at some point in conflict you start with listening, and at some point you need to get together and say, what are we going to do about this conflict? How are we going to be accountable to each other? What are we going to change? And that doesn't happen, it's not an interpersonal thing. I think you need good structure and good scaffolding, and there needs to be institutional accountability in a context where that conflict is happening, because if we take institutional conflict and we make it an interpersonal conflict, then we're not giving people power to actually change that conflict. People ultimately need to know that whatever space that they're in, that institution is going to stand behind what they're demanding of each other. Otherwise, you're just displacing the conflict rather than really resolving the conflict. I hope that was helpful, but sure.
Well, it seems like
Yeah.
in this day and age, there's a lot of reasons for conflict. And
Yes.
part of that's the social media and all the misinformation that's out there. I was starting to talk to somebody yesterday, and I knew that the response he gave me, he had the wrong information. And so we didn't proceed to get into any conflict, but it just seems like all this misinformation is.
It's the most challenging question we face in our facilitation is, what do we do when there's a contestation of the facts? Or it's pretty clear that the facts that someone is bringing into a dialogue are not valid facts. Do we have a responsibility as facilitators? And the problem is when you challenge someone and say, call them out, or say, I'm not sure that those facts are entirely valid, then that person feels like they're not being listened to, and they fall into a defensive position. And so it's a really, really difficult situation to navigate. But what I want to speak to ultimately is, what really motivated the listening project was me arriving at Grinnell and hearing from everyone that there was this massive divide between the college and the town. And so it was like, oh great, we can use dialogue as a way to bridge that gap. And what we've found is, and everyone, I constantly hear all the time in the community, there is such a big divide between the college and the town. But when we had a conversation with people, that divide wasn't as apparent. Why? Is the divide existed in the imagination. Is everyone had heard a story of something the college had done, or something that students, or a community member had done something. And then when we asked everyone, what's your actual lived experience? Oh no, I love the students. I've had great experiences interacting with students. And students would be like, no, community members have been incredibly generous with me. And so that's the problem, is I think we all exist. It's not just in media. We exist in these environments where stereotypes are prevalent, and there's a narrative that gets constructed, that there is a particular way of understanding people, and that's just been the vital thing for us. And it's just as true for politics. It's like, get people together and say, what if you are a Democrat or a Republican, what's your particular experience of that? No one is all the same in their political perspective. They're both and a bit of this and a bit of that. And that's what we experience in the dialogues, in the listening, is just that all of a sudden you can't stereotype someone because you have a much more complicated understanding of them. And
just to add to that, not only disinformation, but what about the whole area of artificial intelligence too? I mean,
so yeah. Finish your question. Sorry.
Well, just the existence of it, and where does it come from, and how do we know? And I think that's scary.
Sure. This is one of those questions where I'm starting to feel really old. Why? Because I'm terrified of AI. And my students here, I'm looking at Grant and Coast in particular because they work with AI regularly. So I've told my facilitators I want us to have a dialogue on AI because I need someone to help me work through my anxiety. But the funny thing is that I've also been introduced to people who have shown me how you can use AI to build a script for a dialogue, or build your prompts for a dialogue, or to do things like I was rightly reminded that there were elements of my presentation that weren't entirely accessible to you visually, and that AI can run things like help me figure out how to make things work better for an audience. And so like that's the challenge of their world is that but I think that that's the thing is we need to have good dialogue about that is I don't want the tech industry to dictate for me AI policy because they're champions of AI and they're over enthusiastic. And I want us to have a robust conversation about the dangers of it, not so that we can be reactionary and be like the world's coming to an end and the Terminator will get us, but so that we can have like how do we have a more informed conversation about AI, and most importantly, when it comes to policy, this is where I think dialogue is important. Is there are always unexpected or inadvertent consequences of policy, things that we didn't think would happen. And those consequences are very real for the people who are impacted by that. And the more robust our discussion of policy allows us to be both attuned to that consequence, respectful of that consequence, or to create enough responsiveness in our policies that when those consequences get amplified, that we can say, okay, that was actually a bad policy. Maybe we need to try something else. We can't be like, it's my way or the highway. We need a more complicated decision-making in our communities because no decision is going to work for everyone in the community. And AI is going to be like, some people might benefit from AI, and some people's lives are going to be fundamentally undermined. How do we account for both things at the same time? John.
I think what I'm asking for is maybe some operational hints of what to do when what someone's saying starts to get you pissed off. Really, I mean.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I'm going to I'll just start because I've shared, from a listening perspective, the one thing that I will say is I have a son who struggles with social anxiety, and it's impacted him at school, and school was easy for me. And so, there have been a couple of times where I've just been like, Andrew, suck it up. It's not so, and I've had to learn to be like, respect different emotional experiences that people are having. And so the same things that I've had to learn that we do together is like, take some breaths, like you've got to calm your emotions. Think about a positive image of this person. At the moment you're thinking, there's something I'm missing about this person. What do I remember that's good about this person? What do I care about this person? So I will recommend it on YouTube. There's a Harvard business review video on how to manage emotions in conflict that provides more detail on those tips. I'd highly recommend that. But I'm also not the expert because, as I'm saying, this is therapy for me. Any one of my facilitators who's had success managing their emotions in a moment of conflict or strong disagreement, what is something that has worked for you? Deb?
I think that something that is, I feel like I'm faced with that every day, with something that I do moderate, so I feel like I am faced with that quite a bit. But something that I guess that has been surprising being part of the listening project is that I have learned myself, and I think I can't speak for everybody else, but I know other people have said this, we are more alike than we are different. And we all come from so many different backgrounds, we would have never met each other, and so that's something that I have learned that I try to keep in mind when I'm having a conflict, that my response I need to stop and think about and wait and remember that we really are more alike than we are different. And we find that out by having open communication with people. So that's for me.
Thanks, Dave.
That's a big thing.
And one other thing that I will add is I think a lot of these skills are hard to implement by ourselves. So something that's become important for me is finding a good, and I'll use the language of a mentor, someone I can talk to say, this is what I'm feeling, this is what I'm experiencing, and that person can be, this is what you're not also seeing. Someone who can talk me through, like, I want to go have a conversation with this person, but I'm not feeling like I'm ready. Are you willing to support, I think or build good structure around, like, if we make these only an interpersonal thing, I think that's a heavy load to carry. And having people that can help us and often be the good listener to us to say, you've seen this from only one perspective, let me talk you through or ask you some good questions so you can see different possibilities, then primes us to be like, oh, I hadn't taken that into consideration. And then you're not in front of the person you're disagreeing with, trying to control your emotions, and then you're able to go back and say, now I'm ready to have a conversation with you. So, that's time.
Yes.
Sure, you want to make a quick, Jan, finish this.
I just wanted to end on a very specific question note. We were split in our reaction to whether we wanted a Q&A or a more dialogue-oriented situation. And it occurred to me that if there's enthusiasm, this is a great time and place to carry it out. I mean, I don't know how
For
much
the bucket
time.
course.
It doesn't have to be a bucket course anymore. Maybe it can be called something else. But it could actually be using this time, not every week necessarily, but just every once in a while to actually put into practice what we're kind of just touching on here and there. Just a thought.
And thank you so much for your time, everyone. I really, really appreciate your attention, your listening. I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Ryan.
Sure.
Okay, before we go, a couple updates. One is, I'll just put it out there, I'm also organizing an event tomorrow night that I want to invite and encourage you all to go to. I have been working for over a year to bring Ballet Des Moines to Grinnell, Iowa. Tomorrow night at 7 p.m. at the Grinnell High School is a premiere performance of both a piece of music and ballet together. The ballet dancers will be dancing around a quartet. There'll be live string instruments at the high school. So please, please consider going tomorrow night at 7 p.m. There is a slight cost, $30 per person. Grinnell College students, you guys get in for free. There's a shuttle that's going to leave JRC at 6:15 and go over to the high school. So please tell your friends, encourage others to go. And then all students in the Grinnell-Newburgh School District also will be able to get in for free tomorrow night. So 7 p.m. tomorrow night, you can still buy tickets from me at the door tomorrow night. So you can just show up. I'll be happy to help you with getting a ticket. But tomorrow night at 7 p.m. next week for the bucket course. We are going to welcome Unity Point Health here in Grinnell, the rural president, David Paul Caveos. I'm so excited to have him here talk about rural health, talk about Unity Point here in Grinnell, and share and get to know him, actually. He's new to the position, about a year or so. I'm so happy to welcome him. So again,